$13 trillion. Vanished. That's how much wealth evaporated from the global economy between 2007 and 2009. Pensions gone. Savings accounts zeroed. Home equity erased. Jobs disappeared so fast the unemployment offices ran out of forms. 9 million Americans lost their homes. 50 million worldwide lost their jobs. The economists called it the Great Recession. Cute name. Made it sound temporary, manageable, fixable. But rewind the tape, because 80 years earlier, they'd seen this movie before. The crash that ended the Roaring Twenties and birthed the Great Depression. And in 2008, we hit replay. Same script, different costumes, identical ending. New York City, September 2008, Lehman Brothers headquarters, 7th Avenue, 50 floors of glass and steel. Investment bank, 150. 8 years old, survived the Civil War, 2 world wars, the dot-com crash, September 15th, 2008, 1:45 a.m., bankruptcy filed, 600 billion in assets, worthless overnight. The trading floor the next morning, empty desks, abandoned Bloomberg terminals, cold coffee in paper cups. 25,000 employees got emails at dawn. Do not report to work. Your benefits end today. Security guards watched bankers carry cardboard boxes to the street. Some crying, some laughing, most in shock. One trader, interviewed later, said, "Friday I was worth 12 million on paper. Monday I was unemployed with a mortgage I couldn't pay. The stock market opened 2 hours later, dropped 504 points in 18 minutes. And in living rooms across America, people watching CNBC saw the same thing their great-grandparents saw in 1929. The machine was breaking, and nobody knew how to stop it. But let's go back to the golden hour, when everybody thought this time was different. The peak. Housing prices had been climbing for 6 straight years, not slowly. Vertically, homes in Las Vegas, appreciating 25% annually. Florida condos doubling in value in 18 months. Everyone was winning. Real estate agents drove Mercedes. Mortgage brokers made $500,000 a year. Construction workers bought jet skis. Waitresses flipped houses as a side hustle. The wealth wasn't just growing. It was everywhere. Touchable. Real. Or so it seemed. A firefighter in Phoenix bought 3 investment properties in 2005, put 0 down on all of them. The bank didn't ask for proof of income. They didn't check employment. They just ran the address through an automated system that said, "These will be worth more next year." He got approved in 45 minutes. 3 houses, $1 million in loans, no money down. When asked why the bank approved him, he said, "They told me housing prices never go down." Famous last words. Here's what excess looked like in 2006. Wall Street bonuses hit a record, $34 billion, paid to 200,000 employees in the financial sector. Average bonus, $170,000. Some Goldman Sachs partners took home $50 million each. The champagne at Morton Steakhouse flowed every Thursday night. Traders ordering 30-year Macallan at $5,000 a bottle. Tipping valets with $100 bills. In Greenwich, Connecticut, hedge fund capital of America, the average home price hit $6 million. 6 for a house. The yachts in Miami got bigger. The cars in Manhattan got faster. The watches got heavier. David Tepper, hedge fund manager, made $4 billion in 2009 betting against the banks. In 2006, he bought a $43 million mansion in the Hamptons, tore it down, built a bigger one. When a reporter asked him why, he said, "Because I can." That sentence, right there, that's the hubris. But it wasn't just the rich getting richer. Middle-class families were cashing out too. Home equity lines of credit, HELOCs. Take out a loan against your house. Spend it on whatever. Cars, Vacations. Flat screen TVs the size of garage doors. Why not? The house was appreciating faster than the interest rate. Free money, as long as prices kept climbing. A teacher in Arizona took out $80,000 against her home in 2005, bought a Lexus, and remodeled the kitchen. When asked if she was worried about paying it back, she said, "The house will be worth $100,000 more next year. I'm making money by spending money." The logic was bulletproof until it wasn't. Banks were printing mortgages like counterfeit cash, Nina loans, no income, no assets. Just sign here, you're approved. Adjustable rate mortgages with teaser rates, 2% interest for 2 years. Then it jumps to 8%. But don't worry, you can refinance before that happens. You can always refinance. Subprime mortgages bundled into securities and sold to pension funds. AAA rated, safe as government bonds. Except they weren't bonds, they were bets. Bets that housing prices would keep rising forever. And on Wall Street, they were making bigger bets on top of the bets. Credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, synthetic CDOs, financial instruments so complex that the people selling them didn't understand them. One Goldman Sachs analyst, in a leaked email from 2007, called his own products shitty deals. He sold them anyway. The rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, were supposed to be the referees, the neutral third party, telling investors what was safe and what was toxic. They gave mortgage-backed securities their highest ratings, AAA, same rating as US Treasury bonds. Why? Because the banks paid them to. The agencies made money by rating products. The more products they rated, the more money they made. If they gave honest ratings, the banks would take their business elsewhere. So they lied. A Senate investigation later found that Moody's gave AAA ratings to securities that had a 50% chance of default. 50%. Coin flip odds. AAA rated. One email from a Moody's executive, 2007. "We could be rating a deal structured by cows, and it would still get AAA. They knew. They rated them anyway. And the regulators, the people whose job it was to see this coming, asleep or complicit. Hard to tell the difference. Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Federal Reserve, architect of the low interest rate policy that fueled the housing bubble. Free market fundamentalist who believed markets self-correct. In 2005, he was asked about the housing bubble. His response, "What bubble?" In 2004, he encouraged Americans to take out adjustable rate mortgages, called them a good deal. In 2008, after the collapse, he testified before Congress, admitted he'd been wrong, said, "I found a flaw in the model, a flaw, like a typo, like an oops. The flaw cost $13 trillion, but here's the crack." The first sign that the story was breaking. Spring 2006. Housing inventory started rising, not crashing, just not selling as fast. In Las Vegas, new developments sat half empty. For sale signs stayed up longer. Price reductions appeared. One developer in Phoenix slashed prices by 15%, then 20, then 30. Nobody noticed. Or they noticed and ignored it. Because in 2006, everyone had been hearing the same thing for 6 years. Housing prices never go down. Real estate is the safest investment. This time is different. 3 lies, repeated so often they became truth. Then the dominoes started falling. New Century Financial, subprime lender, second largest in the country, went bankrupt in April 2007. Bear Stearns. 2 of their hedge funds collapsed in July 2007, invested in mortgage-backed securities, lost everything. Countrywide Financial, biggest mortgage lender in America, stock dropped 70% in 6 months. And the ratings agencies? They started downgrading the securities. AAA to junk in a single quarter. The safe investments were toxic. The pension funds holding them were bleeding. The banks that sold them were insolvent. But the public didn't panic. Not yet, because the government said everything was fine. August 2007, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, gave a speech. The US economy is strong. The financial system is sound. The housing correction will be contained. 2 weeks later, Northern Rock Bank in the UK collapsed. First bank run in Britain in 140 years. Customers lined up outside branches, trying to withdraw their savings. The ATMs ran out of cash. The images aired on American news. But the anchors said, "That's a British problem. Won't happen here." Famous last words. Again, March 2008. Bear Stearns collapsed. 85 years old. Survived the Great Depression. Didn't survive mortgage-backed securities. The Federal Reserve orchestrated a sale to JP Morgan, $2 a share. The stock had been worth $170 a year earlier. Bear's CEO, Jimmy Kane, lost most of his billion-dollar fortune. Overnight, he played golf the day the deal closed. When asked about the collapse, he said, "I don't know what happened. The models said we were safe. The models were wrong." Summer 2008. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the mortgage giants, government-sponsored enterprises. They owned or guaranteed half of all mortgages in America. They were collapsing. September 7th, 2008. The government seized them, put them into conservatorship, bailed them out with $200 billion in taxpayer money. The headlines called it the largest government intervention in financial markets in history. That record lasted 1 week. September 15th, 2008. 1:45 a.m. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. The stock market opened. Panic selling. AIG, the insurance giant, was next. They'd insured all those mortgage-backed securities, all those credit default swaps. Now they owed hundreds of billions they didn't have. The government bailed them out too. $182 billion. Then, Bank of America bought Merrill Lynch in a weekend. Emergency sale, shotgun wedding to prevent another collapse. Then, Washington Mutual failed. Biggest bank failure in US history. Then, Wachovia nearly collapsed. Then, Morgan Stanley. Then, Goldman Sachs. The dominoes were falling faster than the government could catch them. And in living rooms across America, people watched their 401k evaporate in real time. Retirement accounts down 40%, 50%, 60%. The firefighter in Phoenix who bought 3 houses with no money down, foreclosed. All 3. Lost everything. Declared bankruptcy. The teacher in Arizona with the $80,000 HELOC, house worth less than the mortgage, underwater. She mailed the keys to the bank and moved in with her parents. The trader who lost his $12 million paper fortune working at a car dealership in 2010. 9 million foreclosures over the next 5 years. Entire neighborhoods abandoned. Grass overgrown. Windows boarded. Swimming pools turned green. Las Vegas. Phoenix. Miami. Cities full of ghost houses. The American dream. Repossessed. But here's the thing. They'd done this before. Not the same people, but the same system. Same playbook. Same mistakes. Same arrogance. The roaring 20s. Stock market boom. Everyone getting rich. Margin. Loans. Speculation. Unregulated banks making bets with depositors' money. Then, October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. The market crashed. Banks failed. Savings vanished. The Great Depression began. Took 10 years to recover. World War II to fully end it. 13 million Americans unemployed at the peak. 25% unemployment. Breadlines. Dust Bowl. Hoovervilles. The government swore. Never again. They passed regulations, created the SEC, separated commercial banks from investment banks, Glass-Steagall Act, designed to prevent another 1920. It worked for 60 years. Then, 1990, Glass-Steagall repealed. President Clinton signed the bill, stood next to executives from Citigroup, the bank that lobbied hardest for repeal. Clinton said, "The world has changed. We need modern regulations for a modern economy." The banks said, "We can regulate ourselves. Trust us." 9 years later, Lehman Brothers collapsed. 79 years after the Great Depression. Same script, different actors. And the people who saw it coming ignored, mocked, silenced. One man tried to warn them. Brooksley Born, head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, 1990s. She saw the derivatives market exploding, unregulated bets worth trillions. She proposed oversight. Alan Greenspan shut her down. Larry Summers shut her down. Robert Rubin shut her down. They told her, "The markets know best. Regulation will kill innovation." She resigned in 1990. In 2008, she watched the collapse on television. In an interview, she said, "I told them they didn't want to listen." The derivatives she warned about, they caused the crash. September 2008, the ghost of 1929 wasn't just haunting Wall Street. It was manifesting. Same mistakes, same lies, same faith that this time is different. But this time wasn't different. It never is. The only question, how bad would it get? Would it be 1929 again? 10 years of depression, breadlines, 25% unemployment, or would the government step in fast enough to stop the spiral? September 18th, 2008, Thursday morning, Treasury Secretary Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke met with congressional leaders. Behind closed doors, emergency meeting. Paulson said one sentence, "If we don't act immediately, we will have an economy-wide catastrophe within days." Senator Chris Dodd, who was there, later said, "I looked into his eyes. He wasn't exaggerating. He was terrified. The government had two options. Let the system collapse. Free market correction. Survival of the fittest. 1929 all over again. Or bail out the banks. $700 billion. Taxpayer money. Save the institutions that caused the crisis." They chose the bailout. And the American people? They watched the guys who crashed the economy get rescued while their homes got foreclosed. The ghost of 1929 had returned, and it brought receipts. October 3rd, 2008, President George W. Bush signs the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, $700 billion, the largest government bailout in American history. He doesn't smile for the cameras, doesn't give a speech about saving capitalism, just signs, walks away because he knows what this looks like. The government saving the banks that destroyed the economy with money from the people whose lives those banks destroyed. Within 48 hours, the Treasury starts writing checks. AIG gets $85 billion. Then another $37 billion. Then another $40 billion. Bank of America gets $45 billion. Citigroup gets $45 billion. Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all get billions. Not loans with tough terms, not equity stakes with control. Just money, deposited, no strings. And Wall Street, they threw parties. November 2008, New York City. AIG executives take a retreat. California resort. $440,000 tab. Spa treatments. Golf. 5-star meals. The American people, who just bailed out AIG with $85 billion, are losing their homes at a rate of $10,000 per day. But the executives needed to retain talent. That's what the lawyers said. One AIG memo leaked to the press. Employee morale is critical during this transition period. Morale, that's the word they used while families packed moving trucks after foreclosure notices. Congress hauled them in for hearings, made them sit at a table, asked questions. How do you justify spending taxpayer money on spa treatments? The CEO's answer: the expenses were planned before the bailout. Oh, well, that makes it fine then. But here's the thing. 1929 didn't start with a bailout. It started with a crash. Then silence. Then nothing. President Hoover believed the market would correct itself, liquidate labor, liquidate stocks, liquidate farmers. His Treasury Secretary said, let the economy cleanse itself. So they did nothing. Banks failed. 9,000 of them between 1930 and 1933. People's savings, gone. No FDIC, no insurance, just closed doors and empty vaults. Unemployment hit 25%. 1 in 4 American workers had no job, no unemployment benefits, no food stamps, no safety net. People starved, actually starved. Malnutrition deaths spiked in 1932. Children stopped growing because they weren't eating enough protein. Hoovervilles, shantytowns made of scrap metal and cardboard, appeared in every major city, named after the president who did nothing. The economy contracted by 30%. 30. A third of the entire economy vanished. It took World War II to end it. 2008 was different. The government acted. They bailed out the banks, kept them from failing, prevented a total collapse. The question is, did they learn from 1929 or just delay the reckoning? Let's look at what they were actually bailing out. Not just banks, not just bad mortgages. They were bailing out a machine built over 30 years, designed to extract wealth from the middle class and funnel it upward, legally, systematically, with math. Here's how it worked. Step 1, deregulation, 1980s. Reagan era. The government decides regulations are killing innovation. Banks should be free to compete. Savings and loans get deregulated. They start making riskier loans, higher returns, more profit. Then they collapse. 1989. The S&L crisis. 747 institutions fail. Cost to taxpayers $124 billion. Lesson learned: none. Glass-Steagall repealed the law that separated commercial banks from investment banks. The law created after 1920 to prevent another crash gets erased. Now banks can gamble with depositors' money, take savings accounts, and bet them on derivatives. Citigroup forms the next day, merging a commercial bank with an investment bank. Illegal yesterday, legal today. Sandy Weil, Citigroup CEO, celebrates by having the pen used to sign the repeal framed and mounted in his office. That pen ended up costing the global economy $13 trillion. Step 2, cheap money. Alan Greenspan drops interest rates after the dot-com crash in 2000, drops them to 1%. Mortgages get cheap. Car loans get cheap. Credit cards get cheap. Borrowing becomes easier than saving. Housing prices start climbing, not because of supply and demand, because of available credit. The more you can borrow, the more you can pay. The more you can pay, the higher prices go. Feedback loop. Prices double, then triple. Nobody asks who's actually going to pay these mortgages, because the mortgages aren't staying with the banks. Step 3. Securitization. Banks used to hold mortgages on their books. You got a loan from the local bank. You paid the local bank for 30 years. The bank cared if you could pay, because if you didn't, they lost money. Not anymore. Now the bank originates the loan, sells it to an investment bank within a week. The investment bank bundles 1,000 mortgages together, slices them into pieces, and sells those pieces to investors as mortgage-backed securities. The local bank gets paid immediately. Doesn't matter if you default in 2 years. They already got their money, so lending standards disappear. Ninja loans. No income, no job or assets, just a pulse and a signature. One mortgage broker in Florida later admitted, "I could get a homeless guy approved for a $500,000 loan. They didn't check anything." Why would they? They weren't holding the risk. Step 4. Leverage. Investment banks don't just sell mortgage-backed securities, they buy them too, then borrow against them. 30-to-1 leverage in some cases. That means for every dollar they own, they borrow 30 more. Use that to buy more securities. Borrow against those, buy more. When housing prices are rising, this prints money, infinite returns. When housing prices stop rising, the whole thing collapses like a Jenga tower. Bear Stearns had 3-5-1 leverage when it failed. Lehman Brothers had 3-1-2-1. A 3% loss wiped them out completely, and they knew it was risky. Internal emails prove it. One Lehman executive, 2006, "We're flying too close to the sun." Another replied, "Yeah, but the view is incredible." They flew. They burned. Step 5. Ratings fraud. Moody's, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, the ratings agencies. Their job, tell investors which securities are safe. They gave AAA ratings to garbage. How? Because the banks paid them per security. The more securities they rated, the more money they made. If Moody's gave honest ratings, the banks would take their business to Standard & Poor's. If S&P gave honest ratings, the banks would go to Fitch. Race to the bottom. A Senate investigation found that agencies were rating securities without even examining the underlying loans. Computer models, automated, rubber stamp. One internal email from S&P, 2007, "We sold our soul to the devil for revenue." They rated it anyway. And pension funds, retirement accounts, municipal governments, they bought based on those ratings. AAA means safe. That's the system. Except the system was rigged. Step 6. Insurance fraud. AIG sold credit default swaps, insurance policies on mortgage-backed securities. If the security fails, AIG pays out. Sounds reasonable. Except AIG sold $500 billion worth of these swaps without holding reserves to actually pay claims. They were collecting premiums on insurance they could never afford to deliver. Why did regulators allow it? Because credit default swaps were classified as derivatives, not insurance. Derivatives weren't regulated. Loophole. Legal. Catastrophic. When the mortgages started failing in 2007, AIG owed hundreds of billions, money they didn't have. September 2008. AIG's credit rating gets downgraded. They need to post $14.5 billion in collateral immediately. They have $4 billion. The company is worth $200 billion on paper. But paper doesn't pay bills. The Federal Reserve steps in, lends them $85 billion overnight. Why bail out AIG instead of letting it fail? Because every major bank on Wall Street was on the other side of those credit default swaps. If AIG didn't pay, Goldman Sachs would collapse. So would Merrill Lynch. So would Deutsche Bank. The entire global financial system was wired through AIG, one company, unregulated, too interconnected to fail. This is the machine. 6 steps: deregulation, cheap money, securitization, leverage, ratings fraud, insurance fraud. Each step legal, each step rational in isolation. Together, a doomsday device. And the architects of the machine, they got rich. Richard Fuld, Lehman Brothers CEO, made $480 million between 2000 and 2008. The company collapsed. He kept the money. Stan O'Neill, Merrill Lynch CEO, drove the company into the ground. Fired in 2007. Got a $161 million severance package. Chuck Prince, Citigroup CEO, resigned in 2007 after massive losses. Walked away with $68 million. Angelo Mosillo, Countrywide CEO. His company originated more subprime loans than anyone. Paid $67.5 million in an SEC settlement for fraud. Kept $470 million in stock sales. Not one went to jail. Not one. 1929 had villains too. Charles Mitchell, president of National City Bank, sold stocks to retail investors while privately betting against them, made millions, ruined thousands. He was prosecuted for tax evasion in 1933, acquitted. Retired rich. Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange, embezzled millions. Went to prison in 1938, served 3 years. But most of the 1929 bankers walked free, kept their estates, kept their yachts, because financial fraud is hard to prosecute, complex, technical. Juries don't understand derivatives, and by the time investigators finish building a case, the public has moved on. Same pattern. The Department of Justice opened investigations, thousands of them, subpoenaed emails, interviewed executives. Result: one major banker went to jail. One, Kareem Serigaldin, Credit Suisse executive, hid losses on mortgage securities. Sentenced to 30 months. That's it. One guy, out of an industry that employed millions and destroyed trillions. Compare that to the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. Over 1,000 bankers prosecuted. Many went to prison. Why the difference? Because in 2008, the banks argued what we did was legal. Risky, yes. Unethical, maybe, but legal. And they were right. The machine had been built with legal parts. The fraud was systematic, not individual. You can't prosecute a system. But here's what they could have done. Break it up. The banks were too big to fail in 2008. So make them smaller. Break up Citigroup. Split Bank of America. Separate commercial banking from investment banking. Bring back Glass-Steagall. Congress held hearings, talked about it, debated it. Then the lobbyists showed up. 2009 to 2010. Financial reform debate. The banks spent $600 million on lobbying, hired 3,000 lobbyists. 5 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Their message: breaking us up will hurt the economy. We need scale to compete globally. Regulation will kill jobs. The Dodd-Frank Act passed in 2010. 2,300 pages, compromises on every page. It created some new rules, required banks to hold more capital, created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But it didn't break them up, didn't bring back Glass-Steagall, didn't separate commercial and investment banking. The banks got bigger. In 2008, the 5 largest banks held 40% of all US banking assets. By 2015, they held 45%. Too big to fail became bigger and more failable. And the people who lost everything, the 9 million foreclosures, the 50 million job losses worldwide, the families living in cars, the retirees who lost half their 401Ks, they got nothing. No bailout, no rescue. Number $700 billion check. The Home Affordable Modification Program, HAMP, was supposed to help. Promised to modify 3 to 4 million mortgages. It modified 900,000. Most of those redefaulted anyway. Banks dragged out the application process. Lost paperwork. Foreclosed while families were mid-application. One woman in Florida sent her mortgage modification paperwork 6 times. The bank claimed they never received it. Foreclosed while she was arguing with customer service. She sued. Lost. The judge said the bank followed procedure. The procedure was designed to fail. Here's the difference between 1929 and 2008. In 1929, everyone suffered, rich and poor. The stock market crashed, and fortunes vanished overnight. Millionaires jumped out of windows. Literally. In 2008, the rich got richer. The banks got bailed out, paid back the loans, paid themselves bonuses. Wall Street profits in 2009, $61 billion, highest on record, while Main Street bled. Unemployment peaked at 10% officially. Real unemployment, counting people who gave up looking, closer to 16%. Median household income dropped 9%. Took until 2016 to recover. Wealth inequality exploded. The top 1% captured 95% of all income gains between 2009 and 2012. The bottom 90% lost wealth. Because here's what the bailout actually did. It saved the system, not the people in it. It kept the banks from collapsing, kept the ATMs working, kept the credit cards functioning, but it didn't reform the system, didn't punish the architects, didn't prevent it from happening again. It hit pause on the collapse, bought time, kicked the can down the road, and that's the scariest part, because 1929 taught a lesson, a painful one, but the country learned it. Regulations were passed, safeguards were built, the economy stabilized for 60 years. 2008 should have taught the same lesson. Instead, it taught the opposite. If you're big enough, reckless enough, connected enough, you'll get rescued. The risk gets socialized. The profit gets privatized. Lose $1 trillion, the taxpayers will cover it. Make $1 trillion, keep it. That's not capitalism. That's a rigged game. 1929 broke the country, then rebuilt it. 2008 cracked it, then papered over the cracks. And the machine still running, still leveraging, still securitizing, still extracting. The only difference, now it knows it's too big to fail, which means it's too big to care. October 2008. The foreclosure notices arrive by mail, certified, thick envelopes. A family in Nevada opens theirs, reads it, sits down at the kitchen table. The house they bought in 2005 for $400,000 is now worth $180,000. They owe $390,000. The mortgage resets next month. Payment doubles. They can't afford it. The notice gives them 30 days. The father looks at his wife, says, "What do we do?" She says, "I don't know. They're not alone." 10,000 families got the same letter that day. And on Wall Street, in a corner office, an executive gets his bonus, $5 million. For a year, the bank lost $12 billion. He buys a beach house in the Hamptons, cash. The ghost of 1929 was back, but this time it brought friends. January 2009, Detroit, Michigan, 6 a.m., temperature 14 degrees. A line stretches 4 blocks. Not for a concert, not for a sale, for food. The Gleaners Community Food Bank opened at 7. By 5 in the morning, 300 people were already waiting. Families, single mothers, men in suits who'd been laid off from the auto plants. One man interviewed by a local news station, former engineer at GM. 22 years with the company, let go in November. Severance lasted 6 weeks. He's standing in line with 2 of his kids, trying to hide his face from the camera. The reporter asks, "Have you ever needed a food bank before?" He shakes his head, can't speak. Tears freeze on his cheeks. By 9 a.m., the food bank ran out of supplies, turned away 100 families. This wasn't 1932. This was 2009. The bread lines were back. But let's rewind, because the real collapse wasn't happening on Wall Street. It was happening in living rooms, factory floors, and kitchen tables across America. While the government was bailing out banks, the people were being evicted. Fourth quarter, unemployment, 7.2% officially. But that number doesn't count the people who stopped looking, doesn't count the people working part-time who need full-time, doesn't count the underemployed. Real unemployment, closer to 13%. 8 million jobs lost between 2008 and 2010. 8 million construction workers, retail clerks, factory workers, middle managers, accountants, engineers. Companies weren't trimming fat, they were cutting to the bone. Circuit City, liquidated. 34,000 jobs gone. Lehman Brothers, 25,000 jobs. GM and Chrysler, bankruptcy. 100,000 jobs. Borders bookstores, closed. 11,000 jobs. The list went on. Every week, another company, another round of layoffs. And the jobs that remained? Wages froze, benefits cut, hours reduced. Here's what unemployment looked like in 2009. A woman in Ohio worked at a Honda parts supplier for 16 years. Assembly line, $18 an hour, plus benefits. Laid off in February. Severance, 2 weeks' pay. She applied to 150 jobs in 3 months. Got 2 interviews, no offers. Unemployment benefits, $300 a week. Before taxes, her mortgage, $1,100 a month. Car payment, $280. Health insurance through Cobra, $450. The math didn't work. By July, she was 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank sent a foreclosure notice. She called them, begged for a modification. They said, "You need to be current to qualify, but I can't get current without a job. Then we can't help you." She moved in with her sister. 3 adults, 4 kids, 1 2-bedroom apartment. Multiply that story by 9 million. 9 million foreclosures between 2008 and 2014. Entire neighborhoods emptied. Zombie subdivisions. Homes with broken windows. Overgrown lawns. Swimming pools turning black. In Phoenix, you could buy a foreclosed house for $50,000. Same house sold for $280,000 in 2006. Investors swooped in, bought hundreds of homes, cash, turned them into rentals. Blackstone Group, private equity firm, spent $10 billion buying 50,000 foreclosed homes. The families who lost those homes evicted, then charged rent to live in someone else's house. Ownership transferred from the middle class to Wall Street. The American dream monetized. And it wasn't just housing. Retirement accounts imploded. 401Ks lost 40% of their value. Trillions evaporated. A couple in Florida, both in their early 60s, planned to retire in 2009, had saved $800,000 in their 401K. By March 2009, it was worth $430,000. They couldn't retire, couldn't afford to, worked 5 more years. Then the husband had a heart attack. Medical bills, $180,000. Insurance covered some, not enough. They declared bankruptcy at 68 years old. Worked their entire lives, saved, did everything right, lost it all anyway. But here's the comparison. 1929 was worse, wasn't it? Let's check. 1929. Unemployment hit 25%. 1 in 4 workers had no job. 2008. Unemployment hit 10% officially, 16% including discouraged workers. Advantage. 2008. Barely. 1929. No unemployment insurance. No food stamps. No Medicaid. No safety net. If you lost your job, you starved or relied on charity. Churches, soup kitchens, handouts. 2008. Unemployment benefits existed. SNAP, food stamps, Medicaid for the poorest. But those programs were underfunded, overwhelmed. Application backlogs stretched for months. In Florida, it took an average of 90 days to get approved for unemployment benefits. 90 days. People were evicted before the first check arrived. And food stamps, the average benefit in 2009, $125 per person per month. Try feeding a family on that. 1929. No FDIC. Bank failures meant your savings vanished. 9,000 banks collapsed. Life savings gone. 2008. FDIC insured deposits up to $250,000. Your savings were protected. Advantage. 2008. Definitely. But here's the catch. Your savings were protected, but their value wasn't. Inflation. Stagnant wages. Rising costs. The money was there. It just bought less. 1929. Deflation. Prices dropped 30%. Sounds good. Right. Wrong. Deflation means your debts get more expensive. You borrowed $1,000 when dollars were cheap. Now you're paying it back when dollars are expensive. Farmers couldn't pay mortgages, lost their land. Dust Bowl compounded the misery. 2008. No deflation. The Fed printed money, kept prices stable, but wages didn't rise. So everything got more expensive relative to income. Same problem, different mechanism. 1929. Hoovervilles, shanty towns made of scrap metal, cardboard, tar paper, appeared in every major city. New York, Chicago, Seattle, St. Louis. Thousands of people living in makeshift shelters. Central Park had a Hooverville. 1932. Right in the middle of Manhattan. Families, children, living in shacks 50 feet from Fifth Avenue penthouses. 2008. Tent cities. Las Vegas, Sacramento, Fresno. Parking lots full of people living in cars. A tent city in Sacramento grew to 2,200 residents. Shanties between the railroad tracks and the highway. The city tried to shut it down. Where would the people go? Nobody had an answer, so the tents stayed. Here's the real parallel. Both crashes destroyed the middle class, not slowly, violently. 1929. The middle class evaporated. Families that had been comfortable, savings, home, car, became destitute within months. Professionals, teachers, clerks, salesmen stood in bread lines. One banker in New York, 1931, lost his job, lost his savings when his bank failed, ended up sleeping in Central Park. A reporter found him and asked what happened. He said, "I thought I was safe. I thought I'd made it." Famous last words. 2008. Same story, different decade. The Pew Research Center found that 47% of Americans reported their family income dropped during the recession. Median household wealth fell 39%, from $135,700 in 2007 to $82,300 in 2013. The middle class got hollowed out, not destroyed completely. Safety nets prevented total collapse, but damaged, scarred, diminished. And the psychological damage? Immeasurable. 1929, suicide rates spiked. Men who lost everything jumped from buildings. Literally, the stereotype is real. A study found that suicide rates increased 20% during the Depression. Not just the rich, the poor too. Despair, hopelessness, the sense that tomorrow would never be better than today. 2008, suicide rates increased, particularly among middle-aged men, white men in their 50s, the demographic that lost the most wealth. A 2012 study found that every 1% increase in unemployment correlated with a 1% increase in suicides. The recession killed people, not just financially, literally. One man in California lost his job, couldn't find another, lost his house. Wife left, took the kids. He wrote a note, 13 words. I'm sorry, I failed. I can't do this anymore. Tell them I tried. Hanged himself in a motel room. He wasn't alone. But here's what 1929 had that 2008 didn't. A shared sense of suffering. In the 1930s, everyone was struggling. Rich and poor. The stock market crash wiped out fortunes. Millionaires became paupers. The suffering was universal, which created solidarity. Unions grew. Labor movements strengthened. Political will for reform. The New Deal happened because everyone demanded change. 2008, the suffering was concentrated. Wall Street got bailed out. Main Street got foreclosed. The rich recovered within 2 years. The S&P 500 hit new highs by 2013, but median household income didn't recover until 2016. Wealth inequality exploded. The top 1% share of national wealth went from 23% in 2007 to 37% by 2016. The bottom 50% share dropped from 3% to 1%. 1%. Half of America owns 1% of the wealth. That's not a recession. That's a transfer. And the anger? Oh, the anger was there. September 2011. Zuccotti Park, New York City. Occupy Wall Street. A few dozen activists camped in a park, protesting, demanding accountability. We are the 99%. Within weeks, thousands joined. Occupation spread to dozens of cities. Portland, Oakland, Boston, Los Angeles. They didn't have a unified message, no clear demands, just rage. Rage at the bailouts, rage at the bonuses, rage at the foreclosures, rage at a system that saved banks and abandoned people. The media mocked them. They don't even know what they want. But they did know. They wanted the machine broken. The police cleared the camps by December. Tear gas, riot shields, arrests. The movement dissolved. No legislation passed. No bankers prosecuted. No reforms enacted. Occupy failed. But the anger didn't go away. It metastasized. Bernie Sanders ran for president. Democratic Socialist, 70, 4 years old. No corporate donations. His message: the economy is rigged. The billionaires are winning. The middle class is dying. He packed stadiums. 20,000 people in Portland. 30,000 in New York. Kids who graduated college into the recession, drowning in student debt, working gig jobs with no benefits, living with their parents at 28. They heard Sanders and thought, finally, someone who gets it. He didn't win, but he proved the anger was real. And on the right, Donald Trump, billionaire, reality TV star, political outsider. His message: the elites have failed you. The system is corrupt. I'll burn it down. Different rhetoric. Same anger. Rust Belt voters who lost factory jobs, coal miners, people who felt forgotten. They voted for Trump because he promised disruption. Burn it down. Drain the swamp. Blow up the machine. He won. Here's the parallel. 1929 produced FDR. The New Deal, Social Security, labor rights, financial regulation. It also produced fascism. Hitler came to power in 1933. Mussolini in Italy. Franco in Spain. Economic collapse breeds two responses: solidarity or scapegoating, reform or revenge. 2008 produced both. Occupy Wall Street was the solidarity response. Demand reform, tax the rich, break up the banks. It failed. Trump and the populist right was the revenge response. Blame immigrants, blame elites, blame the other. It succeeded because reform is hard. Revenge is easy. And the machine, still running. The banks are bigger. The inequality is worse. The debt is higher. Student loan debt in 2008, $600 billion. Student loan debt in 2004, $1.7 trillion. Credit card debt in 2008, $800 billion. Credit card debt in 2024, $1.1 trillion. National debt in 2008, $10 trillion. National debt in 2200, $34 trillion. The bailout didn't fix the problem. It delayed the bill. And the people who lost everything in 2008, most never recovered. A study by the Federal Reserve found that families who experience foreclosure lost an average of $70,000 in lifetime wealth. Not just the house, the credit score, the ability to borrow, the stability. Kids who grew up during the recession are scarred. They don't trust banks, don't trust the market, don't trust the system. Can you blame them? 1929 broke the economy, then rebuilt it with safeguards. 2008 cracked the economy, then duct taped it back together. The difference? 1929 was a cautionary tale. 2008 was a dress rehearsal. Because here's the thing, nothing was fixed. The banks are bigger. Too big to fail is now official policy. The leverage is back. The derivatives are back. The securities are back. Different names, same game. And the people, still one paycheck from poverty. Still drowning in debt. Still working gig jobs with no benefits. The breadlines in 2009 were temporary. The food banks ran out. The economy limped back. But the next crash, the safety nets are frayed. The unemployment insurance is underfunded. The political will for bailouts is gone. Next time, the breadlines might not go away. Detroit, January 2009, the food bank. The engineer with the frozen tears. The man who worked 22 years at GM. A reporter found him 3 years later, 2012, asked what he was doing now. He said, stocking shelves at Walmart, part-time, $9.50 an hour. The reporter asked, do you think you'll ever get back to where you were? He looked at the ground, shook his head. That world's gone. It's not coming back. He's not wrong. The ghost of 1929 didn't just haunt 2008. It moved in. Permanently. March 9th, 2009, the stock market hits bottom. Dow Jones, 6,547, down 54% from its peak. Then something strange happens. It starts climbing, not slowly, fast. 32% gain in 3 months. Fastest recovery since 1938. By March 2013, the Dow is back above 14,000. New all-time high. CNBC anchors pop champagne on air. The recovery is here. Wall Street bonuses return. Tech stocks soar. Real estate in Manhattan hits record prices. The headlines declare victory. America bounces back. Except for one problem. Most of America didn't bounce anywhere. Here's what the recovery looked like if you were rich. Your stock portfolio doubled. Your home in the Hamptons appreciated 20%. Your carried interest tax rate stayed at 15%, lower than your secretary's rate. The S&P 500 tripled between 2009 and 2019. Tripled. If you had money in the market, you won. Big. Billionaires added to Forbes' list between 2009 and 2019, 607. Total wealth of U.S. billionaires in 2009, $1.3 trillion. Total wealth in 2019, $3.4 trillion. They didn't recover. They exploded. Here's what the recovery looked like if you were poor. Your wages stayed flat. Your hours got cut. Your benefits disappeared. The jobs that came back weren't the jobs that left. Manufacturing jobs lost during recession. 2.3 million manufacturing jobs gained during recovery. 900,000. The rest gone permanently, replaced by service jobs, retail, hospitality, gig work. A factory worker in Michigan made $28 an hour with benefits in 2007, got laid off in 2009, found work in 2011 at a warehouse, $11.50 an hour. Number benefits. That's not a recovery. That's a downgrade. Here's the math. Between 2009 and 2012, the first 3 years of recovery, the top 1% captured 95% of income gains. 95%. The bottom 90%, they got 5%. Combined, most people's incomes actually fell when adjusted for inflation, but the stock market was up. So the headlines said, recovery. Let's compare this to 1920. The Great Depression lasted a decade. Real recovery didn't happen until World War II. But there was a false recovery. 1933 to 1937, FDR took office. New Deal programs launched. Infrastructure projects, jobs programs, banking reforms. The economy grew. Unemployment dropped from 25% to 14%. Stock market recovered 40%. People started believing the worst was over. Then 1937 hit. Roosevelt worried about deficits, cut government spending. The Federal Reserve tightened monetary policy. The economy crashed again. The depression within the depression. Stock market dropped 50%. Unemployment jumped back to 19%. Why? Because they stopped the medicine before the patient healed. 2009 to 2019. Same pattern. The government bailed out the banks, stimulated the economy, kept interest rates at zero. The stock market recovered. GDP growth returned. Unemployment dropped. Everyone declared victory. But the underlying problems never addressed. Wealth inequality, worse than 1929. Wage stagnation, ongoing. Manufacturing decline, accelerating. Infrastructure, crumbling. Student debt, exploding. Healthcare costs, skyrocketing. The recovery was built on cheap credit and stock buybacks, not on actual economic health. Here's how companies recovered. They didn't hire back workers. They bought back their own stock. Stock buybacks in 2007, $589 billion. Stock buybacks in 2018, $806 billion. What's a stock buyback? A company uses profits to purchase its own shares, reduces shares available, price per share goes up, CEO compensation, tied to stock price, goes up. Workers? They get nothing. Apple bought back $40 billion in stock in 2013 alone. $40 billion. How many jobs could that create? How many raises could that fund? Instead, it inflated the stock price, made Tim Cook and shareholders richer, legal, common, devastating for workers. And before 1982, it was illegal, considered market manipulation. Reagan-era SEC changed the rules, made it legal. Another regulation killed, another tool for extracting wealth. Here's the other trick. The Federal Reserve. Interest rates stayed at zero for 7 years. Zero. 2008 to 2015. Why? To encourage borrowing, stimulate investment, juice the economy. Who borrowed? Corporations. Took out cheap loans, bought back stock, paid dividends. Individual consumers? They couldn't get loans. Banks tightened lending standards after the crash. You needed a 720 credit score and 20% down to get a mortgage in 2010. Good luck if you'd just been foreclosed on. So cheap money went to people who didn't need it, and people who needed it couldn't access it. Meanwhile, austerity. Government spending got slashed. The 2013 sequester, automatic budget cuts, education funding cut, infrastructure projects cancelled, research grants eliminated. States laid off teachers, closed libraries, deferred road maintenance. Why? Deficit concerns. The national debt was rising. Except when it came to bank bailouts or corporate tax cuts, deficits didn't matter. Only when it came to helping people. Compare this to FDR. The New Deal spent money, lots of it. Civilian Conservation Corps hired 3 million young men, built trails, planted trees, constructed parks. Works Progress Administration employed 8.5 million people, built 650,000 miles of roads, 125,000 public buildings, 8,000 parks. Social Security created a safety net, old age pensions, unemployment insurance. FDR didn't worry about the deficit. He worried about suffering. And it worked. Slowly, painfully, but it worked. Obama tried a stimulus. 2009, $787 billion. Sounds like a lot. It wasn't enough. Economists estimated the economy needed $1.2 trillion minimum. Obama asked for that. Congress said no. Republican opposition called it socialism. Wasteful spending. Handouts. The compromise. $787 billion. 1/3 tax cuts to appease Republicans. 2/3 spending. It helped. Kept the recession from becoming a depression. But it wasn't transformative. Wasn't a New Deal. It was a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. And the jobs that came back? Different. The gig economy. Uber launched in 2009. TaskRabbit. Postmates. DoorDash. Be your own boss, the ad said. Translation. No benefits. No job security. No minimum wage. You're a contractor, not an employee. A study found that 94% of net job growth between 2005 and 2015 was in alternative work arrangements. Temp jobs, contract work, gig work, the old social contract, work full-time, get benefits, retire with a pension, dead. Replaced by work 3 part-time jobs, no benefits, die in debt. Here's a real example. A woman in Denver, college degree, worked in marketing before the recession, laid off in 2009, couldn't find another marketing job, overqualified or too expensive. By 2012, she was driving for Uber, delivering for Postmates, doing freelance graphic design on Fiverr. 3 jobs, 70 hours a week. Income, $32,000 a year. Number health insurance. She said in an interview, I have a degree. I did everything right. And I'm 1 car accident away from homelessness. Multiply that by millions. The recovery wasn't a return to normal. It was a new normal. Lower wages, less security, more stress, and the metrics everyone used to measure recovery. They lied. Unemployment rate in 2009, 10%. Unemployment rate in 2019, 3.5%. Headlines. Full employment, recovery complete. Except the unemployment rate only counts people actively looking for work. People who gave up, not counted. People working part-time who need full-time, not counted. People underemployed. Degree in engineering, working at Starbucks, not counted. The real unemployment rate, U6, which includes discouraged and underemployed workers, was 7% in 2019, double the official rate. But the headlines only report U3, the polished number, the lie. GDP growth returned, 2% per year average. Sounds healthy, right? Except GDP measures total economic activity, doesn't measure who benefits. If Jeff Bezos makes $50 billion while 1 million workers lose their jobs, GDP might still grow. The economy was growing, just not for most people. Here's the stat that matters. Median household income in 2007, $61,500. Adjusted for inflation. Median household income in 2016, $59,000. It took 9 years just to get back to where people were before the crash. But costs didn't freeze during those 9 years. Housing costs, up 25%. Healthcare costs, up 40%. College tuition, up 63%. So even when incomes recovered, people were worse off. And the wealth, median household net worth in 2007, $135,700. Median household net worth in 2016, $97,300. Still 30% below pre-recession levels. A decade later, where did that wealth go? Up. The top 1%'s wealth increased by $15 trillion between 2009 and 2019. The bottom 50%'s wealth decreased. That's not recovery. That's theft with a better PR campaign. 1929 had a similar pattern. The rich collapsed in 1929, but they recovered fast. By 1936, the top 1% had regained much of their wealth. The middle class took decades, but FDR taxed the rich. Top marginal tax rate, 90 to 1% in 1944. Did it destroy the economy? No. The 1950s were the most prosperous decade in American history. Strong middle class, low inequality, widespread opportunity. 2008, the rich recovered in 3 years. The middle class is still recovering. But did we tax the rich? No. Top marginal tax rate in 2009, 35%. Top marginal tax rate after Trump's 2017 tax cuts, 37%. Barely changed. Capital gains tax, how the rich make most of their money, stayed at 20%, lower than the income tax rate for a teacher. Warren Buffett famously said, "My secretary pays a higher tax rate than I do." He wasn't exaggerating. And the corporations? Corporate tax rate in 2008, 35%. Corporate tax rate after 2017, 21%. Sold as, companies will hire more workers with the savings. Reality, stock buybacks hit record highs. CEO pay hit record highs. Worker wages, stagnant. Apple paid $15.7 billion less in taxes after the cut. Jobs created, 0. They'd already been hiring. The tax cut just goosed profits. So here's the recovery summary. Stock market, recovered and soared. Corporate profits, record highs. Billionaire wealth, tripled. Executive compensation, doubled. Worker wages, flat. Middle class wealth, down. Job security, gone. Healthcare costs, skyrocketing. Student debt, crushing. Infrastructure, crumbling. But GDP is up. Unemployment is low. So, recovery. Here's what didn't recover. Trust. Trust in institutions. Trust in government. Trust in capitalism. A 2019 Pew poll. 61% of Americans said the economic system unfairly favors the powerful. A 2020 poll, 51% of young people said they'd prefer socialism to capitalism. 51% in America. Why? Because they graduated into the recession, couldn't find jobs, drowned in student debt, watched the banks get bailed out while their parents got foreclosed on. They learned the system doesn't work for them. Can you blame them? A man in North Carolina lost his job. Engineer. 20 years at the same company. Laid off in 2009. Applied to 300 jobs. Got 4 interviews. 0 offers. By 2011, he'd burned through savings. Lost his house. Moved into his car. He showered at the YMCA. Ate at food banks. Applied for jobs from the public library. Still couldn't find work. Overqualified. Too expensive. Too old. He was 47. A reporter asked him, "What do you think when you hear the economy is recovering?" He laughed. Bitter. Recovering for who? That's the question. Recovering for who? If you own stocks, recovery. If you owned a home in the right zip code, recovery. If you had a tech job in San Francisco, recovery. If you were everyone else, survival. And here's the scariest part. The recovery was built on debt and cheap money. Corporate debt in 2008, $3 trillion. Corporate debt in 2019, $6.5 trillion. Student debt in 2008, $600 billion. Student debt in 2019, $1.6 trillion. Credit card debt in 2019, $1.1 trillion. Auto loan debt in 2019, $1.3 trillion. National debt in 2019, $23 trillion. The recovery wasn't organic growth. It was borrowed growth. And every borrowed dollar has to be repaid with interest. FDR cut spending. The economy crashed again. COVID hit. The longest economic expansion in US history ended in 1 month. Unemployment went from 3.5% to 14.7% in 8 weeks. Faster than 1929. Faster than 2008. Why? Because the recovery was fragile, built on cheap credit and stock buybacks and gig work and debt. One shock, one virus, and it collapsed. The ghost of 1920 was never exorcised. It was just sleeping. And the bailouts happened again. $2 trillion in 2020. CARES Act, stimulus checks, unemployment benefits, small business loans, but also $500 billion for corporations, airlines, hotels, cruise lines. The Paycheck Protection Program, supposed to help small businesses, got raided by big companies. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse got $20 million. Shake Shack got $10 million. The Lakers, yes, the NBA team, got $4.6 million. They returned it after public outcry, but they applied. And thousands of actual small businesses shut down permanently. The pattern repeats. Crash, bail out the rich. Tell everyone else to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Wait for the market to recover. Declare victory. Ignore the people still suffering. Then crash again. How many more times? Because here's the truth. The recovery from 2008 was an illusion. The stock market recovered. The economy didn't. And the economy that did emerge was more unequal, more unstable, more dependent on debt than before. The ghost of 1929 didn't disappear. It just got better at disguising itself as prosperity. Next question. What happens when the disguise falls off again? March 2020. Stock market falls 34% in 23 days. Fastest crash in history. Faster than 1929. Faster than 2008. Unemployment goes from 3.5% to 14.7% in 8 weeks. 22 million jobs lost in 1 month. The longest economic expansion in American history ends in 30 days. Why? A virus. COVID-19. But here's the thing. The virus didn't break the economy. It exposed what was already broken. The recovery from 2008 was fake, built on cheap debt and financial engineering. COVID ripped off the mask. 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense in 2019. 78% lived paycheck to paycheck. One shock, one missed paycheck, and millions faced eviction. Hunger, bankruptcy. That's not a healthy economy. That's a house of cards. But let's zoom out, because COVID wasn't the last shock. It won't be. Climate disasters, political instability, supply chain collapse, debt crisis, automation, AI displacement. The shocks are accelerating, and the economy more fragile than ever. Here's the setup for the next Great Depression. Corporate debt, $11 trillion. Record high. Consumer debt, $17 trillion. Record high. National debt, $35 trillion in 2025. Record high. Stock market valuations. Price to earnings ratios. Near 1929 levels. Wealth inequality. Worse than 1929. Home ownership rate among young people. Lowest since records began. Savings rate. Collapsing. Real wages. Stagnant for 40 years. This isn't speculation. This is the present. Let's break it down. Corporate debt. $11 trillion. Companies borrowed massively during the zero-interest rate years. What did they do with the money? Hire workers? Invest in R&D? Build infrastructure? No. Stock buybacks, dividends, executive bonuses. Now interest rates are rising. Those loans have to be refinanced at higher rates. Companies that were profitable at 2% interest go bankrupt at 6%. Zombie companies, firms that can't cover their debt payments with earnings, make up 20% of publicly traded companies. 20%. 1 in 5 corporations is already dead, just hasn't fallen over yet. What happens when they collapse? Mass layoffs, pension fund losses, 401k implosions. Sound familiar? Consumer debt, 17 trillion, credit cards, auto loans, student loans, mortgages. Average credit card interest rate in 2024, 22%. Average American credit card balance, $6,500. Do the math. That's $1,430 a year just in interest. For the average person, auto loans, people financing cars for 7 years. 7. By the time you pay it off, the car is worthless. Student loans, 1.7 trillion. 43 million borrowers. Average balance, $37,000. Jobs that require degrees pay less than they did 40 years ago, but the debt is higher. Defaults are rising. Delinquencies are rising. When it breaks, and it will, it'll make 2008 look small. National debt, $35 trillion. Annual interest payments on that debt, over $1 trillion. $1 trillion per year. Just the interest. That's more than the defense budget, more than Medicare. Where does that money go? To bondholders, investors, many of them foreign governments. We're paying $1 trillion a year to service debt while infrastructure crumbles and people can't afford housing. What happens when interest rates stay high? When nobody wants to buy US bonds anymore? Currency collapse, hyperinflation, Weimar Republic scenarios. It's not impossible. It's historical precedent. The stock market. Price to earnings ratios. How expensive stocks are relative to actual profits are near 1929 levels. In 1929, the P/E ratio hit 30. Then the market crashed 90%. In 2024, the P/E ratio is 28. Tech stocks, worse. Tesla's P/E ratio in 2021 hit 1,000. 1,000. That means investors were paying $1,000 for every $1 of earnings, betting on infinite growth. Infinite growth doesn't exist. And when reality hits, crashes. We've seen this before. Dot-com bubble, housing bubble. Now everything bubble. Stocks, bonds, real estate, crypto, all inflated simultaneously. When one pops, they all pop. Wealth inequality. The top 1% owns 32% of all wealth. The bottom 50% owns 2%. Worse than 1929. In 1929, wealth inequality sparked the crash. Concentrated wealth meant concentrated risk. When the rich lost money, everyone lost jobs. Same pattern now. 10 people own as much wealth as the bottom 180 million Americans combined. 10 people. That's not an economy. That's feudalism with Wi-Fi. Home ownership. The American dream used to be work hard, buy a house, build equity, retire comfortably. Dead. Homeownership rate for people under 35, 37%. Lowest ever recorded. Why? Housing prices have tripled since 2000. Wages haven't. Median home price in 1990, $120,000. Median home price in $22,000. Median income in 1990, $29,000. Median income in 2024, $70,000. Housing got 3 times more expensive. Income only doubled. Math doesn't work. And who's buying the houses? Private equity, corporations, investors. Blackstone owns 80,000 homes. Invitation Homes owns 83,000. They're not landlords. They're algorithms. Maximizing rent, minimizing maintenance. Housing became a financial asset instead of a human right. And the next generation? Renters forever. So here's the question. What triggers the next collapse? Option 1. Debt crisis. Interest rates stay high. Corporations can't refinance. Mass bankruptcies. Layoffs. Unemployment spikes. Consumer spending collapses. Recession becomes depression. Timeline could start within 2 years. Option 2. Commercial real estate. Empty office buildings. Work from home killed downtown. Buildings worth 50% less than their mortgages. Banks holding those loans in trouble. Regional bank failures. Contagion spreads. We saw a preview in 2023. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic. That was contained. Barely. Next time, might not be. Option 3. Geopolitical shock. War in the Middle East disrupts oil. Prices spike. Inflation returns. Fed raises rates. Economy crashes. Or Taiwan. China invades. Global supply chains collapse. Semiconductors stop flowing. Every industry that depends on chips, cars, phones, computers, shuts down. Unemployment explodes overnight. Option 4. Climate collapse. Not theoretical. Happening now. Hurricanes cost $50 billion in damage. Wildfires destroy entire towns. Droughts collapse agriculture. Insurance companies go bankrupt. FEMA runs out of money. Coastal real estate becomes worthless. Miami, New York, Los Angeles. Trillions in property value erased. Climate doesn't crash the economy once. It crashes it repeatedly. Every hurricane season, every fire season, every flood. Death by 1,000 disasters. Option 5. AI displacement. Not science fiction. Happening now. ChatGPT can write articles, code software, analyze data. Midjourney creates images. Sora generates videos. How many jobs disappear? Graphic designers, writers, programmers, customer service, paralegals, accountants. Oxford study estimated 47% of US jobs are at risk of automation. 47%. What happens when unemployment hits 30%? Not from a recession, but from obsolescence. Universal basic income, massive retraining programs, revolution. Nobody knows. Nobody's prepared. Pick your trigger, or combine them. The fragility is systemic. One shock cascades into the next. And here's the difference between now and 1929. In 1929, most Americans lived on farms or in small towns, grew their own food, had tight communities. When the economy collapsed, they survived. Barely, but they survived. In 2025, 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck in cities, totally dependent on supply chains, no food security, no savings, no community networks. 1 month without income, and they're evicted. 1 week without grocery deliveries, and they're hungry. The modern economy is efficient, but efficiency is the opposite of resilience. And the government, will they bail us out again? 2008, $700 billion bank bailout. Controversial, but passed. 2020, $2 trillion COVID relief. Bipartisan support. Next time, the political will might not exist. Public trust in government, lowest ever recorded. 30% approval. Half the country thinks the government is corrupt. The other half thinks it's incompetent. Pass another multi-trillion-dollar bailout? While people are losing homes, you'd see riots. And even if they tried, there's a limit. National debt is already $35 trillion. How much more can you borrow? China holds over $800 billion in US bonds. They're selling, not buying. Japan holds over $1 trillion, also selling. When foreign governments stop buying US debt, interest rates spike, borrowing costs explode, the bailout becomes unaffordable. Then what? Here's what 1929 teaches us. Crashes don't announce themselves. They arrive suddenly, violently. September 1929, market at all-time highs. Economists saying permanent plateau of prosperity. October 1929. Crash. Nobody saw it coming, except the people who did, and they were ignored. Same pattern. Housing market at record highs. Greenspan saying, what bubble? September 2008. Lehman Brothers collapses. Experts shocked. Nobody could have predicted this, except people did. They were called crazy. Now, stock market near record highs. Corporate debt at record highs. Consumer debt at record highs. Economists saying the economy is strong. Soft landing. No recession. Sound familiar? But here's the deeper parallel. 1929 and 2008 weren't just economic crashes. They were systemic failures. Failures of regulation. Failures of oversight. Failures of accountability. And after each crash, the system was supposed to change. After 1929, Glass-Steagall, SEC, FDIC, Social Security, safeguards. After 2008, Dodd-Frank, stress tests, capital requirements, more safeguards. But regulations get weakened, loopholes get exploited, memories fade. Glass-Steagall got repealed in 1990. Dodd-Frank got gutted by Trump in 2018. The safeguards get dismantled before they're tested, and the machine, the wealth extraction machine, keeps running. Here's the core problem. Capitalism requires growth, infinite growth. Every quarter must beat the last, but growth on a finite planet is impossible. Resources are finite. Workers are finite. Consumers are finite. When you can't grow by making more, you grow by taking more. Take from workers, suppress wages. Take from consumers, raise prices. Take from the future, borrow and pollute. Eventually, there's nothing left to take. That's the end game, and we're closer to it than most people realize. Corporate profits as a percentage of GDP, highest ever. Worker wages as a percentage of GDP, lowest in 70 years. The math is simple, unsustainable. When workers can't afford to buy what companies sell, companies fail. When companies fail, workers lose jobs. Feedback loop, downward spiral. 1929 spiraled for a decade. Only World War II ended it. War spending, government investment, full employment building tanks and planes. 50 million dead, but the economy recovered. That's a hell of a cure. 2008 spiraled for 5 years. Only massive government intervention stopped it, but the intervention didn't fix the underlying problems, just delayed them. Next time, we might not get a bailout, might not get intervention, might just get the spiral. Here's the scenario. Debt crisis triggers corporate bankruptcies. Layoffs spike. Consumer spending collapses. Stock market crashes. Banks fail. Government tries to intervene, but the debt is too high. Interest rates explode. Dollar weakens. Inflation surges. Savings evaporate. Unemployment hits 20%. Foreclosures restart. Tent cities return. But this time, there's no safety net. Social security is underfunded. Medicare is strained. Unemployment benefits depleted. People starve. For real. And the political response? Not solidarity. Not reform. Scapegoating. Authoritarianism. Fascism. Same pattern as the 1930s. Germany blamed Jews and communists. Italy blamed immigrants and Democrats. Spain had a civil war. America in 2026. Half the country blames immigrants and the left. Half blames corporations and the right. Nobody blames the system, because the system is invisible. And while they fight each other, the people who actually broke the economy, they're in New Zealand, bought bunkers, remote compounds, private security, waiting it out. Here's the most haunting parallel. 1929 didn't just crash the economy, it changed the world. The Great Depression led to World War II, 50 million dead, the global order rebuilt from ashes. The next crash, it won't just be economic, it'll be civilizational, climate collapse, mass migration, resource wars, political fragmentation, the old systems, capitalism, democracy, globalization, won't survive unchanged. Something new will emerge. The question is, will it be better or worse? 1929 gave us the New Deal, social security, labor rights, shared prosperity. It also gave us fascism, totalitarianism, genocide. The crisis produced both. The next crisis will produce both. Reform movements, mutual aid, community resilience, and authoritarian movements. Nationalism, scapegoating. Which one wins depends on choices made now. But here's the kicker. We're not making those choices. The warnings are everywhere. The data is clear. The trajectory is obvious. And we're doing nothing. Still bailing out banks. Still cutting taxes for the rich. Still deregulating. Still extracting. Running the same script that failed in 1929. Failed in 2008. Expecting different results. That's not optimism. That's insanity. The ghost of 1929 isn't haunting us. We're replaying it, frame by frame. The boom, the bubble, the blindness, the crash. We know how this movie ends. We've seen it twice already, and we're watching it again, in real time, with full knowledge of what comes next. A financial analyst in Manhattan works at a hedge fund, makes $800,000 a year. He sees the data, sees the debt levels, sees the inequality, sees the trajectory. A reporter asks him, "Are you worried about another crash?" He shrugs, "Probably. But I'll be fine. I'm hedged. What about everyone else?" He pauses. They should have hedged too. That's the system talking. Not a person, the system. And that's the final lesson from 1929. The crash is never a surprise to the people who caused it. They see it coming. They prepare. They profit. It's only a surprise to everyone else. The workers who lose jobs. The families who lose homes. The retirees who lose savings. They're always blindsided because they believe the lie. This time is different. But this time isn't different. It never is. The ghost of 1929 isn't a ghost. It's a blueprint, and we're following it exactly. The stock market will crash. The banks will fail. The jobs will disappear. The homes will be foreclosed. The question isn't if. The question is when. And when it happens, when the market drops 40% in a month, when unemployment hits 15%, when the breadlines return, people will say, "Nobody saw this coming." But that's a lie. Everybody saw it coming. We just chose not to believe it. 1929 taught us that unregulated capitalism leads to collapse. 2008 reminded us. The next crash will confirm it. 3 strikes, same pitch, same swing, same miss. Here's the epitaph for the American economy. They knew it was broken. They knew how to fix it. They chose not to. Because fixing it required sacrifice from the people who benefited from it being broken. And they refused. So the machine keeps running, extracting, concentrating, destabilizing, until it doesn't. The ghost of 1929 isn't a warning anymore. It's a schedule, and we're right on time.